about 7:30. We're in the lower section of where we came the first 2 days of the week. Been calling for about 20 minutes. Got a bull that's responding. He's coming in. Don't know exactly where he's at right now. So let's see what happens. Okay, I'm going to do a quick update while we have a minute. Well, it probably won't be that quick, but so it's Thursday morning. It's just about 8:30. But yesterday, I didn't do a recap at the end of the day. So yesterday, Wednesday, the very first thing we had to do was go back to the place where I shot my deer and see if we could recover her. I was pretty nervous about it. We gave her like over an hour, and before we left, she still hadn't expired. And she stood up. I went out to see, she had bedded on the fence line. I went out to see, it was dark, so I had my headlamp on. Went out to see if she was possibly dead. Saw her eyes reflecting from a headlamp. She did not want to get up, but eventually she did. She crawled through the fence. So at that point, we just left her for the rest of the night. And I was concerned about how warm it was and whether coyotes were going to find her or whatever, whether we'd even find her, how far she'd go. Well, it turned out just about as good as it possibly could. We got there before it was light, sat on top of a hill looking down on the fields where I had shot her. And, as soon as it was light, like spotted a white spot out in the alfalfa field, and sure enough, that was her. She was just laying out there. Meat was all still good. She was pretty cool, considering how warm it was, but it was all good. So we took the morning. I butchered her, got her in the cooler. Gary looked for my arrow. We never did find my arrow. And yesterday, then, it was 88 degrees yesterday. It was just smoking hot. So we really, weren't very optimistic about any place. So we took the morning, the rest of the morning. It was probably about, 10 o'clock or something by the time I was done with the deer. Maybe it was a little bit earlier, but we took some time. We drove through some areas, did a lot of glassing, looking with the spotters, and never turned anything up. So we headed back into town, and we got my deer in the freezer, and then just kind of figured out what we were going to do for the day. So then, and honestly, I thought at that point, this day is, we're just going to burn this day because it's so miserably hot. So we kind of finally settled on a place that we went to last year. It's actually the same coulee where we shot the bear. And neither one of us had any hopes of anything happening. So hot. We spent the middle portion of the day kind of at the place where he parked to walk into this coulee. And I walked down through this draw that's right there, and just I kicked up a ton of deer. I have a second whitetail doe tag, so if I can get a shot at another whitetail doe, I can fill that tag too. So I walked down through the bottom of this draw and kicked up a ton of whitetail. I had a doe at 25 yards, but she was behind brush, and I couldn't make that shot. So I never ended up getting anything, but waited until about 5 o'clock. It started to cool off a little. It dropped a couple of degrees, and so we headed up and over. We had to climb out of the draw that we're in, and then up over this kind of CRP or pasture, and then you get to this coulee, and it's such a generic coulee. Like, it's small. I mean, every time I have a hard time imagining there's anything in there other than maybe some deer. But in any case, we got there. We were really cautious about coming over the top and looking in there. We were doing a lot of glassing, and sure enough, Gary spots an elk moving through the brush. So we watch her for a while. There's no cover there up on the hillside that we're on, and we had to be there because of the wind. So we made a plan, kind of dropped back, circled around. She was headed down the draw, so we thought we'd try to get out in front of her, keep the wind right. We got down there. Eventually we relocated her, but she was still way up the draw where she had stayed, so she was still like 350 yards away. So we backed out again. We came back up a little ways, found a spot where there's just a little outcropping of rocks and some brush, and then some rocks on the ground like 40 or 50 yards away. So Gary laid down in the rocks basically, and I sat at the brush that's on those rocks, and Gary started calling, and eventually more elk came out. So I ended up seeing like 4 elk down to my left, about 250 yards away. And they heard Gary's calls, so eventually they kind of worked their way to the bottom of the draw. And then one of them finally came up on our side, but was still like 200 yards away. The others kind of hung back on the other side. But as Gary was calling and I was watching them, I happened to look down in the draw right below us, probably about 100 yards away, and there was another elk that had come out there. And so now there's an elk below me about 100 yards. There's 4 elk off to my left, about 200 yards. Gary's calling, and they all look like they're going to start coming. And so now I'm kind of stuck in the middle, and where I would position myself for the elk on the left, I had the brush in the way. This elk that was down below me, I was completely exposed. So I was signaling to Gary to keep calling, and as he did, that elk dropped into the bottom of the ravine. And when it did, I jumped into the brush. Instead of being on the edge of the brush, I jumped into the middle of it so that I wasn't exposed for her. And then I was still trying to watch the elk to the left. The one that had crossed disappeared. I don't know where it went. So at that point, I'm like, I don't know if those ones are coming, but now there's this one below. Gary keeps calling, and over the span of an hour, eventually more elk came up over on the left-hand side, but they weren't really coming to us. But I positioned for them because I never saw any more from the ones below, so I positioned to get a shot with those elk if they came over. And once you know, I looked down, and not only one elk, but 3 elk were coming up on our side directly below us. Well, I was turned the other way, and there was a gap in the brush straight down, and so where those elk were coming up, they could see me between the kind of 2 bushes that I was hiding behind. And so I couldn't turn to get in position for them, and they were clearly going to make it to us first. Gary's still calling to my right. And so I'm stuck sitting this way looking, and these elk, they're there now, but they're not moving. These elk are coming up, but I have to wait until they get behind this bush right here. And there was 2 cows on the spike, and the spike was hanging back. So the cows are getting closer and closer and closer. They're behind the bush. But I still can't move to get position for them because the spike is staring at me at like 60 yards, maybe 70 yards. So I have to wait until the spike gets behind the brush. Well, by the time he does, the cows now are like, I ranged one, it was at 79 yards, but that was a little bit downhill. By the time the spike got behind the brush, now they were straight across from me, so probably had closed another 20 yards. And so I had my arrow knocked. I had to swing my arrow up over the brush and had to spin. And when I did that, my feet made noise on the rock that I was standing on or kneeling on. And that got the cows' attention, and they started coming towards me. So at that point, I get turned, but I can't range. There's no time. They're staring right at me. So the brush was right in front of me here, but now the elk are right here, and they're looking right at me. There's a few small branches, but they're looking right at me. So I get turned. I'm pointing at them. The one cow comes directly at me and then turns because she's still looking up where Gary was calling. So she's broadside, but I don't have time to range. So I guess the distance, 40. It was probably like 30. And I shoot, and it goes right over her back. And of course, then they take off down the hill. I'm calling. They slow down. They stop. They watch, but they cross the ravine. Well, then the other elk, then they eventually make it across. They all come together. There's like 13 of them, and there's a big bull in there. I had no idea there was even a bull. I thought it was all just cows and calves and then the one spike. Because I couldn't see all the ones over to my left. And Gary could, but anyways, it ends up being a big bull in there, like 12 other elk, something like that. Missed a shot at like 30 yards, misjudged the distance, was broadside. Like, we thought there was no way anything was going to happen yesterday. We were basically just like trying to wait out the day until we could get to today where the temperature's a little bit lower. And then I ended up getting a shot. It was incredible, and it worked. Our setup worked. I just didn't know the elk were going to come from two directions. So yeah, my elk tag should be punched right now. I already have a deer in the freezer, and I should be focused on getting a bear or a second deer and taking a bunch of meat home. But here we are, back at it, trying to get another elk. So anyway, it was an incredible night. Those elk stayed. They never did bust out. They got up on the hillside opposite of us, probably 400 or 500 yards away, but they stayed there. When we eventually walked out, we looked for my arrow, lost that arrow too. But it was almost dark, so we didn't have a lot of time to look for it. But yeah, so I'm disappointed that I missed, but I'm very thankful that I didn't wound her. And it was really cool that we kind of pulled the rabbit out of the hat and made something happen when there's no way anything should have been going on yesterday, as hot as it was. So, we just got to stay positive and keep working. So this morning now, then we got in here. We're on the lower section of where we were in the first 2 days. We started calling, same routine. About 20 minutes into our calling, we finally got a bull to bugle, and he bugled multiple times, and each time was getting closer, so we knew he was coming. But the wind is just, literally it's every direction, like every couple of minutes it's changing directions. So we knew it was going to be questionable, but there's a big ravine below me, and then up this other side, and that's where the private is, and that's where the elk are, and that's where he bugled from. Even though we knew the wind was swirling, we didn't think it was carrying all the way over to that side, but he bugled 3 or 4 times, and each one was getting closer, and then it just stopped, and I felt the wind on the back of my neck multiple times. I think that's what happened, because it's just silent now, and we haven't heard anything more. So it's about 8:30. The sun is coming out, obviously, but it's only supposed to get to be 69 today, I think, which is such a relief from the last couple of days. 2 days ago it was like 85. Yesterday it was like 88. So the weather's been tough. It's been challenging. That's it. That's where we're at. I should have a milk in the freezer today, but I don't. So keep going. See what happens.